And welcome to this edition of Hidden History Stories from the Secret City. I'm Keith McDaniel, along with my co-host, Ray Smith. Good morning, Ray. How are you?
I'm very good, Keith. How are you today?
I'm great. We have a very special guest with us today, and I'm going to let you introduce him.
We certainly do. We're glad to have Stan Norris with us today. Any of you who know about the Manhattan Project will recognize his book, Racing for the Bomb. I can get it up here where you can see it. And you'll note that he's an authority on General Groves. So we'll be talking about that with Stan today. We're really glad to have you with us, Stan. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, Ray. Thank you.
All right. Let's start by talking about the book and how you come to write such a great book about General Groves and the Manhattan Project. Go back with us in time and tell us how that came about.
Well, of course, when I worked at the Natural Resources Defense Council, I was keeping track of nuclear weapons, and I knew about the Manhattan Project and all of that. And there was a person named Stanley Goldberg who started a project on a biography of General Groves, but got a very rare disease and died. I went to the widow, and she agreed to turn over his research material to me, and I bore down and in about 2.5 years produced the book. It was quite a different book than Stanley Goldberg would have written, because he was more of a historian of science and had that angle and hadn't written anything really. He just kept accumulating a lot of material, which was a great benefit to me since I didn't have to visit many of the libraries and so on. So I took all of the boxes out of his basement and got to work and produced the book. In 2002, it came out in hardcover. Then it came out in paperback. And now it's actually in paperback with another publisher that I have the copyright. So I gave it to another publisher because my original publisher didn't want another printing of it. So that, in short, a short account of the book.
Well, I'm really glad you wrote that book. I use it as one of my primary resources. So it's really well done. And of course, we're talking about Oak Ridge. So you visited Oak Ridge, I believe.
I have visited Oak Ridge. One time I came with the 509th Composite Group meeting. The group that dropped the bomb, that was headed by Tibbets, and they have different locations. And one time it was at Oak Ridge, and I came for that one. So yeah, I've been to Oak Ridge a couple of times, speaking and participating in the 509th annual meeting.
I believe you mentioned that on one of your trips, you were able to meet Bill Wilcox. Bill was the historian for the city of Oak Ridge prior to me being put in that position. And Bill was a good friend. And he of course worked at Y12 and at K25 and did a lot of effort in helping us form the Manhattan Project National Historical Park and trying to save as much of K25 as we could. So you were able to meet him, I believe, on one trip.
Not only that, I mean, he was a very gracious host. He liked my book as well, and knew a great deal about it. And I'm sorry I didn't have him as a resource when I wrote my book, but he showed me around and was very gracious and helpful, and we all miss him a great deal.
Stan,
Yes,
excuse me, Ray. I was just going to ask. A lot of in Oak Ridge are familiar with General Groves, and to a certain degree. But what are some of the things about General Groves that maybe people don't, that is not common knowledge? One of the things I was interested in is his, how did he rise to become a general, and how did he rise to the point where he was put in charge of the Manhattan Project?
Well, he was a West Point graduate, and he graduated early because of World War I. He graduated in the class of November 1918 on November 1st. And of course, 11 days later, November 11th, the war was over. So he had an abbreviated career at West Point, but was only number 4. If he had gone the whole way, I'm sure he would have been number 1. He had a driving ambition. He chose the Corps of Engineers as his branch, and began an interwar career doing all sorts of jobs for the Corps of Engineers. And in the run-up to World War II, was in charge of all domestic construction and production, getting ready for World War II. So that's what they don't know about him, that he already was driving forward in incredible speed to get the United States ready for World War II, which happened, of course, in December 1941. One of the jobs, one of 100 jobs that he had under his control was building the Pentagon, which he did in record time. And he's also associated with that. But when it finally came time to build the bomb, General Marshall, who was Chief of Staff, and Stimson, who was Secretary of War, basically chose the best man to do it, the most ambitious, the one who had a record already, and that was Colonel Groves. And he said, to do the job, I'll have to be a general. So they gave him 1 star, and off he went. And he pressed down on the accelerator in September 1942 and never let up until there was a bomb in 1945, about 1,000 days later. So I think the secret to the whole thing is the Corps of Engineers. The mentality of this group of people, of men at the time, who were fearless and built anything they were asked to do. You want the Panama Canal? I'll give you the Panama Canal. You want the Fort Peck Dam? I'll give you the Fort Peck Dam. These people had a mentality that nothing was impossible. And Groves was a pure expression of this Corps of Engineers and had a lot of mentors who were engineers themselves, who had done big things. And when it came time for him to do it, to build the bomb, everything was possible and full speed ahead. So he dusted off his Rolodex, who he just used to help build Army mobilization sites. I mean, he had 1 million people under his watch and hundreds of projects going on at the same time. So people don't realize that just before he got the full-time job of building the bomb, that he was already enormously accomplished in getting things done. So that's what I think is the secret to the whole thing. If you look into the Corps of Engineers, it's an amazing institution which trained people to do big things. And he was tapped by other engineers, actually, and General Marshall and Secretary of War Stimson to be the guy who built the bomb. So there had been a previous person who was in charge of what became known as the Manhattan Project, a guy named James Marshall, no relation to George, who was also a West Point engineer, but he wasn't moving very fast. So he was only around for a little while, a couple of months, from June until September 42. And basically Roosevelt and the rest of them said, we're not moving fast enough. We need somebody to go quicker. And they chose Groves.
And they chose well. He took charge, came to Oak Ridge, I believe the day of his first meeting, even left that meeting early to catch a train to come down here because he wanted a place. He wanted a plant, something tangible, quick, and he chose Oak Ridge.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Ray. That first meeting in, I think it was September 23rd or 24th, 1942, there was a meeting with Stimson and the rest about how to organize this effort. And Groves excused himself and said, I have to catch a train. And he went to Oak Ridge, which was already under consideration to be a place to build the fuel, the reactors, and the Kellytrons and so on to help build the bomb. And he decided, he made decisions in a hurry and said, you know, this is the place I'm going to build the factories that will produce the fuel. And originally the plutonium was going to be created there, but it was Groves's decision to move it to the state of Washington, which he did so. And Groves became really the person who made all of the big decisions, choosing the corporations who had just helped him build all of the facilities for supporting World War II, and the individuals that ran these different places. So it was really Groves who was a key figure in all of these decisions. And I think that my book, the biography of Groves, fills in a big blank because many histories of the Manhattan Project, as good as they are, leave Groves out or have him as a marginal figure over on the side. They know that an Army general took over, but they don't know much about him. But when you focus in on Groves and what he did day in, day out, and incredible stamina, choosing all of the sites at Oak Ridge and Hanford and Los Alamos, he was the decider in all of those, and all of the important people. You fill in the blanks and you see how the Manhattan Project came about.
Yeah, I think you're right. I believe Groves was the key, and his driving force was the key to moving rapidly and involving. And a key point you mentioned is that he had these contacts, and he did not hesitate to bring pressure on them to get them to do their patriotic duty, and that is to support what he was doing for the Manhattan Project. So yes, there are three main sites that you mentioned: Los Alamos, Hanford, and Oak Ridge, which are the three sites of the Manhattan Project National Historical Park now. But he had, I hesitate to put a number on it because he had so many other places that were contributing in some way to the support of the effort. And he didn't hesitate in strong arming, if you will, the leaders of industry to get them to come. He brought the people that actually operated the plants, the people from DuPont, the people from Kellogg, the Kellex company. And then, of course, Tennessee Eastman was the company he chose to manage the Y-12 Calutron. And I believe when you visited Oak Ridge, you were able to see both K-25 and those Calutrons. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes, I know. And Groves, I mean, he was, I mean, I got tired just reading his appointment book because, you know, he was full speed ahead, 16, 18 hours a day. I don't know how he did it, but he had incredible stamina. And if he walked into your office and wanted something, I mean, you were finished. I mean, he got it. He pressured DuPont to take over. And, you know, he had great faith in the people that he had worked with before. So he knew who to call upon to help him this time around. And, you know, that was a great benefit that he didn't have to reinvent the wheel. I mean, he knew the people that he could count on to do the job, and he gave them responsibility, and they did their jobs.
One
story
excuse me, Ray.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Keith.
Okay. At some point, Stan, I want you to talk a little bit about, and Ray and I have both told the story many times about, you know, the building of K-25 and the construction of it and this huge project when the barrier material had not yet been proven. So I know that caused the general a lot of grief and sleepless nights. So, if you could talk maybe a little bit about that would be great.
Right. The barrier material that was the filter, basically, in the K-25 plant to enrich the uranium had not yet been invented. So there were various candidates of how to do it. A lot of the research took place at Columbia University up in upper Manhattan in New York City. And Groves, he would make decisions based on the best science he had at his disposal. And he had some, Nobel Prize winning scientists to call upon. And he chose one thing, one way of doing it, and went out to see how it was done in an automobile that drove all night. And when he got there, he announced that they do it another way, and you have to dismantle what you've prepared already and build it this way. And eventually that was done. He worked closely with a guy named Percival Keith Dolby was his nickname, and with the Kellogg and Kellex people. So he had great faith in Keith, who was a chemical engineer, and with Kellogg, which was the overseeing corporation that helped build K-25 and the barrier material. So, it had to be done. We still don't know. This is one of the last secrets of the Manhattan Project, of what that barrier material is made out of. It has to filter out uranium gas without corroding. And it's a very skillful technique, apparently. I think it's something like Teflon, or it has tiny, very tiny holes that allow the gas to pass through and enrich itself. This was another one of the many problems that Groves had to solve on the fly all along. But each time it was confronted, he seemed to solve it, and sometimes made a bad choice, but rarely, but reversed himself when he knew it was bad and went in another direction. But, he didn't do it alone. He did it with a lot of other very clever, smart people. And it wasn't all him, but he was definitely the leader of the team effort.
Well, one of the comments that Keith and I use is we quote Groves as saying, if the K-25 project turned out to not work, it became a white elephant, I believe he said. He'd be testifying before Congress for years about why he'd spent all that money on it. But another Groves story that I know you're familiar with is how he got the AAA credit rating. Can you tell us that story?
Well, prior to the Manhattan Project, prior to building the bomb, he had been involved in all sorts of efforts to build Army airfields and camps and so on and so forth. So he knew about the priority system. And when he got the job, one of the very first things he did was ensure himself and his project that he would have AAA priority. So he marched into the office of the head of who gave out the priorities, and had a letter addressed to himself, Dear General Groves, I will get AAA priority anytime I want. And he wanted the signature of the director. And the director said, who is this guy? He just walked into my office. So this is like 2 days after he got the job, but he knew he would have to have priority in accessing valuable resources and material. So the director said, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to sign it. And Groves said, well, I'll have to tell President Roosevelt that you're not on board with this. And at that point, the director reversed himself and signed it. And Groves used the priority liberally in terms of assessing and getting the things he needed to build the bomb. Maybe there was a scarcity of nickel, or maybe there was a scarcity of this or that. And Groves was not hesitant and not bashful about using his priority system to help him get what he needed to move forward. So it's a great deal of insight into Groves's personality, that he was, ambitious and determined and focused, and nothing stood in his way. He had a will of steel. He had a great deal of power. And, I was amazed over the writing of this book, and still am today, at the degree to which the different leaders, Stimson, Marshall, and the rest of them, trusted each other and gave each other the responsibility and let them do their job. There was no oversight. Of course, Congress didn't know about this thing. And even Truman, when he accidentally became president in April 1945, had just heard of it, but they'd been inherited, the biggest secret of the war. So it all went on behind, closed doors. There was no press looking into it. Groves made sure that it's remained a secret. That was the way Roosevelt wanted it. That was the way everybody wanted it. And it was a great surprise, even to his wife, who on August 6th found out what her husband had been doing the years before, when she read in the newspaper that Hiroshima had been bombed. And so even within Groves's family, they didn't know what he was doing, and he kept it that way.
How did I know Groves was a powerful figure, powerful personality. How did the people that worked for Groves see him and view him? I mean, was it respect? Was it resentment? What was it?
Well, there are a couple of quotes in my book. I think the best one is from John Lansdale, who was his right-hand man in terms of security and intelligence. And Lansdale wrote about that and said that, he was a hard worker. He never let up. He made everybody else feel as though they were a part of something. And it was that kind of leadership that led everyone to work hard, because he was working as hard as he could. And, you can't let your boss down. So everybody else worked as hard as he did, and everyone did. And he saw immediately, this is something I really wonder at. I mean, he saw in people who could do the job and who couldn't, and made decisions immediately. Of course, the best decision was, or the first decision was choosing the scientific director, Robert Oppenheimer. But he did it again and again and again. And he chose people, and they did their jobs. They were left alone. And if they needed anything, they would call on him, and he would get it for them. And if he needed anything, he would rarely call upon the Secretary of War or the Chief of Staff, Marshall, for help in getting something. But everyone deferred to everyone else. The level of trust was amazing. And we just don't have that today, I don't think. And the kind of leadership which identified people to do their job. Of course, it started with Roosevelt, and he chose Marshall as his chief of staff, and he chose Stimson as his Secretary of War. These were, great choices, and to fight World War II, which was, the backdrop of this whole thing, that the bomb was built in the midst of the war.
So another person that worked for him that actually was there when he came to the job, and he kept him there, was Colonel Nichols. And as you know, he made some of the same comments about General Groves being a hard driver and making quick decisions. And then the quote that I use out of his book, The Race to Trinity, is that his last sentence in that quote is, if I had to do the atomic bomb project over again and had the privilege of picking my boss, I would pick General Groves. So I think he had a lot of confidence in Groves, and And I believe Groves had confidence in him as well, because he literally ran the day-to-day activities from Oak Ridge, but Groves made all of the major decisions. There is one quick story that I'd want to insert here about Colonel Nichols. You know, General Groves agreed to purchase this property here in Oak Ridge in East Tennessee, and they didn't tell the governor about it. So Groves told Nichols, we really ought to tell governor about this. So Nichols, being quite busy, sent a captain down to the governor's office, and the governor saw him, made him wait till late in the day. At the end of the day, he let him come in, and he handed him the letter. And the governor took that letter and tore it up, threw it in the trash. So when Nichols told Groves about it, Groves said, I believe we made a mistake. Maybe you need to go see that governor.
Yeah, there's another story. It's possibly apocryphal, but it could be true, that when Groves decided that that Tennessee was going to be the place, he went to the senator, who was from Tennessee, and said, do you think you can help me locate a secret site? And I want to build something there. And the senator said, just where in Tennessee do you want to build that, General?
Yeah, that was Senator McKellar.
Yeah, Senator McKellar, right.
Story too, all the time about him saying that. And we don't know exactly all of the details about it, but it's a really good story.
It's a good story. And even if it's not true, to the details, it says something about everybody's interest in locating Tennessee, which is an interesting choice in itself. I mean, it was already considered as a place to do this before Groves got there. And when he rushed out the door in Washington and took the train and looked over the place, he said, I'll take it. And he already knew how to basically take over a site, and did so repeatedly in the run-up to World War II, when he was head of all Army mobilization. So he just contacted the real estate branch of the Army and the government, and took it over and began immediately to build his factories.
What happened to Groves? What happened to Groves after the war? What did he do after the war?
Well, of course, in August 1945, the bombs were used, and Groves got repeatedly some medals and spoke about it and so on and so forth. But, it was a changed world. His goal ultimately was to be the chief of engineers, but he was too young, and there were competitors for that job. And Ike became chief of staff and basically told him that, your future is limited. And, everybody knew about the bomb at this point. It was going to be no longer a military project. It was going to be a civilian one, which Groves, I think, wanted. So he became sort of out of favor almost immediately, and retired and took a job at Remington Rand up in Connecticut, and basically didn't do much up there, but got a salary. And Remington Rand, of course, had the early computers, and the people who headed Remington Rand thought Groves would be instrumental in helping them get government contracts and so on and so forth. And Groves worked for them for a while, and finally moved back to Washington, was in ill health, and in 1970, of course, he died, and is buried at Arlington Cemetery. So his career afterwards was, really from the sidelines. Occasionally he would comment on, something happening. maybe Oppenheimer's security trial, which he was testified in, and other matters. But his career, he wasn't going to do the Manhattan Project again. There was no second act here. This is it. And he did his job. He did it well. He got that 3rd star. So he retired as a lieutenant general. They gave him a 3rd star on the way out of the door. And that was it. So his Army career came to an end, and he went off into civilian life, and they started writing histories of the Manhattan Project, and he wasn't there. He looked at all of these writings about whether the Pentagon cost too much, and he would write letters and criticize this and criticize that. And so he kept in touch with, how his handiwork had been treated in the literature. And I am sorry he wasn't around to see my book, but I did have help from his son, who was also Army, West Point, Corps of Engineers, 3-star, like father, like son. And he was very generous, and I think appreciated my book. He's unfortunately passed away not long ago, a couple of years ago, but was a great help in getting to know the general himself, his father, and what he was like. So letters and recollections and things that hadn't been used before, I used to my best advantage in writing the book.
It's a shame that our government, that our country didn't recognize his genius, after the war, and but thankfully for you and your work and your book, you're able to bring that to bear to the public to show just how as your book says, he was indispensable, to the Manhattan Project, and it probably wouldn't have happened the way that it happened had it not been for him.
That I believe is true. I think it would have eventually happened, but it would have taken longer. And in 1945, each of these days counted. And in terms of him being a indispensable person, that's what I have as a subtitle. But you don't arrive there by accident. You have to be indispensable for a reason, and the reason is that you have to look back and see what his accomplishments were early on, and they were monumental. They were enormous. So I mean, he had 1 million people working for him. This is before the Manhattan Project, and many, many billions of dollars, much larger than the Manhattan Project itself. So he already was in command of, very large things. And the Manhattan Project was big in itself. And, but it wasn't as big as what he had once undertook in building the Army mobilization. In terms of his treatment of, see, I forgot what I was going to say. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
That's all right. Yeah. Let me let me thank you again for that series that you wrote when you were asked to come to Oak Ridge for the Secret City Festival, and and we couldn't make that happen. We actually didn't have the festival, but you were so kind as to let me publish those articles that consisted of what you would have said had you been here. I think that generated another interest in General Groves just recently, and I think it's good to do that periodically, just to refresh people's memory about General Groves, and you are the authority that can do that so well. So I want to thank you for doing that for us.
No, okay, Ray, I was glad to do it. I did remember what I was going to say, and that is every month or every 2 months, we get in the newspapers and elsewhere some challenge before us, and they always invoke the Manhattan Project. We need a Manhattan Project to do A, B, C, D, I don't know, to cure cancer, to go to the moon again, or whatever. So the Manhattan Project is often invoked as an example of how we mobilized ourselves to perform a certain task. And that task was to build a bomb as quickly as possible and use it. And under the control of General Groves. Now, could we do it again? Well, we need great leadership, and we have a much different society than we did then. We're not at war. Do we need a Manhattan Project to control and ban the pandemic that's afoot? Yes, we do, of course. And Biden is attempting to mobilize what resources we have at the federal level to do that. So, the Manhattan Project sticks in our memory as, really something quite positive. We pulled up our socks and we got the job done, and it helped World War II. And the guy in charge of this effort, in conjunction with all of the other people, General Marshall and Stimson and all the rest of Patton and the rest of them, we won World War II. So it's a constant reference point to something we achieved when we put our mind to it and had leadership and trust in one another to do the job.
Are there any statues of General Groves anywhere that you know of?
Are there what?
Statues, like a statue of Groves.
There are not. I mean, he virtually disappeared. He virtually disappeared. I have written to the PBS program, the American Experience.
Yes.
I mean, he would be a perfect person to have a film done about him. Also, I think he should be on a stamp, on a U.S. postage stamp. And I've contacted the Postal Service about that. But, he's still marginal in many people's minds as the guy over on the side. Oppenheimer gets all of the good press, a very complex, accomplished person who I have great admiration for, but it's rarely said that, Groves chose him against the wishes of everybody. And
Stan
Oppenheimer turns out to be, quote unquote, the father of the atomic bomb and so on and so forth. Actually, there are many fathers, but chief among them, I think, is General Groves.
Right.
Actually, Stan, there is a statue of General Groves and Robert Oppenheimer. It's located in Los Alamos. It's just outside the Los Alamos County Museum at the Fuller Lodge, and it's a life-size statue that stands out there, and that, as far as I know, that's the only one in existence.
That's right, Ray. I forgot to mention that one. It's a life-size statue of General Groves and Oppenheimer out in front of in Los Alamos, so everybody can see that. I have a funny story about that. Now, a friend of mine contacted the person who created that statue in bronze, I believe, and had a miniature done, and contacted me afterwards, this friend of mine, and said, will you be home so-and-so? And a Federal Express turned up with this very heavy thing. And it's about a 3-foot statue of General Groves that I have in my office, who I use as my inspiration to, get busy and get to work and do something. So I have a reproduction of that statue of General Groves, a smaller version of it.
That's a very interesting thing for me to learn, because as you and I both know, Cindy Kelly with the Atomic Heritage Foundation, Cindy had me to go up and pick up a statue, a little 3-foot statue of Robert Oppenheimer that she had. That was the same thing that you have of General Groves. She had of Robert Oppenheimer. So I have brought that to Oak Ridge.
Oh,
Now,
good
let
for
me
you.
tell you right quick, if you ever want to do anything with your General Grove statue, I would love to bring it to Oak Ridge and put it right beside Oppenheimer.
Okay, probably one day you'll get that right. But right now, I look at him and he, he tells me, get to work, move fast.
I fully understand that. And I am delighted to know that there was a statue, a small statue made of him, and that now I know where it is.
I know. I think that same friend of mine sent the version of Oppenheimer to Cindy, and sent me the one of Grove. So in miniature, we have each of our people as companions.
All right. Well,
That's great.
well, Stan, thank you so much for Ray. Are you finished? I mean,
Yes, that's fine. Thank you, Stan. We really appreciate you.
All right, Keith. All right, Ray. Thanks a lot.
yeah, we really do. We really appreciate it. And Ray, do we know who we've got coming up next time?
Yes, we've got Bill Carey, who is the Tennessee History for Kids is his website. He's an authority on the history of Tennessee. Not only is he interested in the Manhattan Project in Oak Ridge, he's also very involved in the Civil War history. He works with schools. He has plans in this year to take some, maybe up to 50 school teachers on a tour of Oak Ridge. And I'm helping him to set that up, and want to be sure that he gets everything that he needs. And one of the things that he agreed to do was to come on our program and talk about what he's doing this year. He also has written in Tennessee Magazine a story about Oak Ridge. If you remember, the letter that was on the American Museum of Science and Energy wall for years to Parley Raby, telling her that the government was taking their property for the Manhattan Project. He did research on that letter and wrote a story about Parley. Now, of course, Parley was the granddaughter of John Hendricks, the prophet of Oak Ridge. So we'll talk a little about that, but we'll let Bill tell us about his plans for the summer to bring some teachers to Oak Ridge. So that'll be our next program.
All right, very good. All right, folks.
Okay.
Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.